Hello and welcome to Cafetography.co.uk. Today we'll be taking an in-depth look at one of Canon's most popular lenses, the highly regarded and very versatile Canon 24-105mm f4 IS USM-L. It's often included as a kit lens when people buy an expensive full-frame camera, although it's also a useful lens to use on a less expensive APS-C camera. The 24-105mm zoom range of this lens is quite impressive and makes it excellent for all kinds of photography. On a full-frame camera, 24mm is a very wide angle and it zooms all the way into 105mm. That wide focal length could make this a particularly useful lens for travelling. 24mm isn't a very wide angle on an APS-C camera though, so the lens is a little more suitable for full-frame users. The lens has a constant maximum aperture of f4, so it doesn't let in a lot of light, but it's not a dark maximum aperture either. Another nice feature of this lens is image stabilization. Here's some footage with image stabilization turned off and now turned on. The lens can hold your image quite still for you, which can really help for low-light photography and video work. In fact, pretty much all of the lens's parameters make it fantastic for use as a lens for handheld video work. No wonder this is one of Canon's most popular lens designs. Let's look at the lens's build quality. Firstly, you'll see that it's quite big and it's also slightly heavy. That's not too surprising for a zoom lens designed for full-frame cameras, but still, we can't help thinking it could have been a little smaller. However, it certainly feels like a very high quality and solid product while you're using it. The lens has a very smooth zoom ring, which again is useful for video work. The lens's focus ring is extremely smooth and precise, and it also has full-time manual focusing, so you can turn that focus ring at any time. The front element of the lens does not turn or extend as you change focus, which is always good news for people using polarizing or graduating filters. The autofocus motor on this lens is extremely fast, very accurate, and very quiet. So overall, apart from being a little bit oversized, this lens handles extremely well. It's a very well built piece of equipment indeed. Let's look at the all-important picture quality. We'll start by testing the lens on one of Canon's more expensive full-frame cameras, in this case a 20-megapixel Canon 6D. We'll turn on chromatic aberration and peripheral illumination correction for this test. At f4, the lens is very sharp in the middle of the image at 24mm. Things are looking good. Colours and contrast are very good indeed. Over in the corners, the lens is slightly softer, but image quality is still decent and chromatic aberration is not really noticeable. Stop the lens down to f5.6 for slightly sharper corners, and they're as good as they are going to get at f8. So overall, it's a good performance for the lens at 24mm. Let's zoom in to 50mm. At f4, the lens is very sharp in the middle with good contrast levels, although some lenses can perform a little better. The corners of the image are just okay, looking a tiny bit softer. However, stop the lens down to f5.6 and those corners become much better, and the centre of the image looks fantastically sharp. So, with a little stopping down, image quality is great at 50mm. Finally, let's zoom all the way into 105mm. At f4, the middle of the image is still very nice and sharp, which is great to see. The corners, once more, are just a little softer, but still giving a decent performance with almost no chromatic aberration. Stop the lens down to f5.6 and there's a very nice improvement, pushing the sharpness really high in those corners. The middle of the picture frame still looks great. So overall, on a full-frame camera, the lens gives a very respectable performance indeed. It's generally very sharp at f4, and if you stop the lens down to f5.6, then even the corners look fantastic. It delivers very clean images with good contrast and little chromatic aberration. You can get sharper lenses than this, but considering the zoom range of this Canon L lens, it really puts in a great performance. Well, although this lens is most useful on a full-frame camera, some people are interested in using it on APS-C, so let's try it on a more common APS-C or cropped sensor camera. We'll use a 20 megapixel Canon 70D, and again we'll turn on chromatic aberration correction and peripheral illumination. At 24mm, the lens is razor sharp at f4, in the middle of the image and right over into the corners. The whole image frame is looking fantastic. What a great performance right off the bat. The lens remains this sharp as you stop down its aperture. Nice. At 50mm, the lens continues to look fantastic in the middle of the frame, offering us great sharpness, colours and contrast. The corners of the image look just a touch softer, but they're still very good. Stop the lens down to f5.6 for even more sharpness in those corners if you really need it. Again, it's a pretty great performance. Let's zoom all the way into 105mm. At f4, in the middle of the image, we see very good sharpness levels, although not quite as bitingly sharp as it is at wider angles. The corners of the image also look great, but just a little softer. However, as usual, if you stop the lens down to f5.6, image quality jumps up and looks really sharp from the corners back into the middle of the image. All in all, the lens gives a very commendable performance on an APS-C camera, similar in many ways to its full-frame performance. Pictures are very clean and sharp, so it's clearly a very dependable lens. Well, let's take a look at distortion and vignetting levels. They are not really a problem on APS-C cameras, so we'll test it on a full-frame camera. At 24mm, we see strong barrel distortion, which is unsurprising for a lens with such a long zoom range. In the edges of the picture frame, we also see quite a bit of darkness, so the lens is clearly having some problems with vignetting. The corners are brighter when you stop the lens down to f5.6, but even at f8, some darkness is visible in the corners. You will want to use peripheral illumination correction on your camera with this lens. Zoom in a little to 35mm and the distortion is basically gone. Once you zoom all the way into 105mm, the lens gives quite noticeable pincushion distortion, with your picture looking a little bunched up in the middle. Again, the corners are a bit dark. Stop the aperture down to f5.6 for an improvement in vignetting, and at f8 it's finally gone. Overall, the lens gives a relatively weak performance for distortion and vignetting, but this is to be expected considering its rather long zoom range. The lens can focus averagely close to your subject, although it won't be mistaken for a macro lens at any time. Close-up image quality is good at f4, and stop down to f5.6 for very sharp close-up pictures. Let's see how the lens performs against bright lights. At wide angles, the picture quality still retains contrast and looks fairly good, although once you zoom the lens in, the lens is struggling a lot more, particularly with flaring. This is not an ideal lens for getting an out-of-focus background in your pictures, as the maximum aperture of f4 is not very wide. However, you can get a bit of a narrow depth of field going, especially on a full-frame camera. The good news is that this lens gives very nice quality bokeh. Those out-of-focus areas look pretty good. Well, what can we say overall? For a lens with quite a long zoom range, the Canon 24-105mm is very sharp, giving very clean quality images indeed. It trips up a little in terms of distortion and vignetting levels, but overall, the picture quality is great and very dependable. It's one of the most versatile professional lenses Canon make, and also one of the best for video work. And being a slightly older lens now, it's also very affordable. This is a brilliant multi-purpose lens for anyone with a full-frame camera, and it performs very well on APS-C cameras too. It comes very highly recommended.